Hi, thank you all for being here for this session. This is the 7th Grand Challenge session titled Getting to Know Women's Equal Citizenship, What Hurts and What Works. We like to begin all of our Grand Challenges by remembering the many millions of people that we have gathered on behalf of, several of those who are not permitted to travel here to be with us. So may I please ask you to set aside your phones and connect your hearts and minds with not just the complex issues of statelessness, but the people of statelessness. We read you the words of Mayu Ali. A stream of blood gushes from where my husband and son were killed. I watched my baby snatched from me, thrown into the bonfire before my eyes. He couldn't even cry full song, burnt to fuel in a minute. At least I didn't have to see the corpses like the others did, nor did I have to bury them. They're kind killers. Killers enjoying the hunt. One asked for money and gold. I gave them everything I owned, including my earrings. And they raped me, one after the other. The last one said, I am not going to use my penis on you. Instead, he used a knife. They set me alight and left me for dead. I find myself silent and bleeding. The world is too brave to watch us being killed. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm so pleased to have you all here today for this panel that will look at gender discrimination and nationality rights. My name is Catherine Harrington. I'm the campaign manager of the Global Campaign for Equal Nationality Rights. Just get our PowerPoint up there. Oops. Okay. Of course, technology is, there we go. The Global Campaign for Equal Nationality Rights is a coalition of national and international organizations and UN partner agencies that are working together to end gender discrimination in nationality laws so that women and men have the equal right to acquire, change, and retain their nationality, and the equal right to pass their nationality to their children and spouses. In terms of the types of gender discrimination that we find in nationality laws, there's gender discriminatory provisions when it comes to the ability to pass nationality to children. Sometimes this is changed whether or not the child's born inside or outside of the country. It can be impacted by the marital status of the mother or father. And there's also gender discrimination in terms of a woman's ability to confer nationality to a spouse, as well as to retain her own nationality, for example, if she's acquired nationality through marriage and the marriage dissolves. There are 25 countries today that have nationality laws that deny women the equal right to pass nationality to their children. There are 3 countries, and here you see the 25. There are 3 countries that deny fathers the equal right to pass nationality to their children when those children are born outside of legal marriage. There are approximately 50 countries that have some form of gender discrimination in their nationality laws. And you can see here that the countries that have this form of discrimination today are found in regions around the world. There's countries with gender discriminatory laws in the Caribbean, in sub-Saharan Africa, in the Middle East, North Africa region, in South Asia, in Southeast Asia, in the Asia-Pacific region. And this is not surprising when we take note of the fact that gender discrimination and nationality laws were historically the norm. Most countries around the world had nationality laws that held men to be the sole providers of nationality to their children, and women acquiring the nationality of their spouse if they married a man from another country. And this also would not be surprising when we think about the reality of the world when these nationality laws were made, where women lacked equality in law in a wide range of areas in terms of lacking the right to vote, lacking the right to own property in some instances, equality within the family and marriage. And so when we look at gender discrimination in nationality laws, it really, at its core, represents quite clearly the patriarchal power structure and mindset. Men as head of households, children's identity stemming from the father, women follow their husband. But as societies came to appreciate and respect that women should be treated as equal human beings, as equal citizens with men in the family and in society, these laws began to change over the past 100 years, in fact. And when we look at the countries that have discrimination in their nationality laws today, many of them are actually former colonies. And at the time of independence, when most of these countries formed their nationality laws, discriminatory nationality laws were the norm, and in fact, they were also the norm in the former colonial powers at the time of these countries' independence. And so oftentimes these laws were based on the discrimination that existed in other nationality laws at that time, including the former colonial powers. This is not, of course, to say that customs and practices in these countries did not also have gender discriminatory aspects to them, but just to highlight that gender discriminating nationality laws has no particular local tradition, culture, or religion associated with it, but rather is a legacy of the global patriarchal system. And in fact, when we look at all of the major world religions today, when we look at any cultural practice and tradition, we know that the core values embrace protection of children, the sanctity of the family, children's welfare. And when we look at the impact of gender discrimination and nationality laws, and you'll hear quite clearly the impact of these laws during our conversation, you see how much they harm children and families, resulting in denied access to education, to healthcare, access to formal employment, the ability to acquire family inheritance, even resulting in obstacles to marriage and forming a family itself. And of course, gender discrimination and nationality laws is one of the primary root causes of statelessness. And there are a variety of reasons why when, for example, a mother can't pass her nationality to her child, that child can be rendered stateless. There are men that do not have the ability to confer nationality on their children because, of course, they are stateless themselves. And in some instances, that is because of gender discrimination in the nationality law of that country. In some instances, there's a conflict with the laws where if the father acquired nationality by descent from his parents but was not born in that country of nationality, he may be prevented from actually passing on nationality to the next generation. And then, sadly, there are some instances where fathers, for a variety of reasons, have refused to provide the assistance and the documentation needed for their children to acquire their nationality. And beyond being a root cause of statelessness and causing many human rights violations associated with statelessness, these laws fundamentally undermine the concept of women as equal citizens. They reflect the state implicitly designating women as second-class citizens and rejecting women's equality within the family. But the good news is, 87% of countries uphold citizens' equal right to pass nationality to their children. 75% of countries uphold comprehensive gender equality in their nationality laws. Their nationality law applies to citizens, regardless of whether the citizen is a man or a woman. And the additional good news is that there is increasing momentum to end gender discrimination in nationality laws once and for all, globally. In many countries where this discrimination persists, countries are taking steps today to eliminate this discrimination. But the other truth is that in far too many countries, there is strong opposition for reform. And in far too many countries, this strong opposition is held by those holding political power. This opposition is despite countless commitments and declarations in international arenas regarding commitments to gender equality, or the less political term, women's empowerment, ratification of international laws mandating gender equal nationality rights, and even national constitutions requiring non-discrimination on the basis of sex and citizens' equal right to protection before the law and equality before the law. At the same time, in order to combat statelessness and advance inclusive societies, we must look beyond nationality laws and how gender intersects with nationality rights, and that's something that will also come up in this panel, and the way in which gender impacts the rights of stateless persons. So as you'll hear from the panelists today, I hope you will keep in mind three things. that the fight for gender equal nationality rights is necessary to eradicating statelessness, that this is a fight that we can win, and this is demonstrated by the countless countries that have enacted reforms for gender equal nationality rights and are implementing them, and that this fight requires action and support from a variety of actors, and I hope that we can count on all of you to join that fight with us and the Global Campaign for Equal Nationality Rights and all of our partners. So I'm going to stop with the introduction there, and I'm incredibly pleased and excited to introduce to you our esteemed moderator, Her Excellency, Sweden's Ambassador to the Kingdom of the Netherlands, who will then be introducing our other panelists and moderating our conversation. Ambassador Annika Markovic is, in addition to being the ambassador of Sweden to the Kingdom of the Netherlands, is also the permanent representative of Sweden to the Organization on the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, the permanent representative of Sweden to the International Criminal Court in The Hague, and she has also been the permanent representative to the OECD and UNESCO, and has served as a first secretary at the Swedish mission at the UN in New York, in addition to a long history of diplomatic positions, particularly fighting for human rights and combating the proliferation of weapons. So, Ambassador Markovic, thank you so much for your moderation, and I turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Catherine. And yes, an applaud for Catherine, and of course that long introduction, very kind, but it makes me feel very old. I'm really honored to be here today and to serve as moderator for this amazing panel discussion that we will have this afternoon on women's equal citizenship. And I really look forward to listen to all the panelists. But first, if you allow me a few introductory remarks, because I wanted to mention that Sweden, my country, has really a long tradition of promoting human rights and gender equality. But in 2014, we took another step that was really important, and that is when we introduced a feminist foreign policy. And the reason for having a feminist foreign policy is, of course, the systematic discrimination that still marks the daily lives of countless women and girls around the world. So our feminist foreign policy is an agenda for change, and we strive to strengthen women's and girls' rights, representation, and access to resources. All women should have the same power as men to shape society and their own lives. And ensuring women's full enjoyment of human rights is not only the right thing to do, it's also a matter of reason and efficiency. If we want to achieve sustainable development, and we have all subscribed to the 2030 Agenda, then we must include the whole population, use all potentials, and leave no one behind. Women must have equal rights to men, as men, to be represented at all levels of society, in parliament, local authorities, in boardrooms, as well as equal access to resources and social services. Gender equality has improved around the world, but the commitments made in the 1979 Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, CEDAW, and at the World Conference of Women in 1995 are far from being fulfilled. And this is also true for nationality issues. Gender discrimination in nationality laws still denies women equal citizenship and undermines their equality in societies and families. There are approximately, as we heard already, 50 countries that have some gender discriminatory provision in their nationality law, including denying women the right to pass nationality to a non-national spouse on an equal basis with men, or denying women the equal right to acquire, change, or retain their nationality. Approximately 50 countries in the world that have gender discriminatory provision in their nationality law. 2019. Furthermore, gender discrimination in nationality laws can impede children's rights to education, to health care, and to other social services, as well as their ability to access formal employment and property rights as an adult. But there is also some good news. In the past 15 years, 19 countries have removed gender discriminatory provisions from the nationality laws. The struggle for equal nationality laws is also an area where many civil society organizations come together in support of change, including to combat statelessness. So to conclude, we see change is possible, but it's going too slow. It's necessary, it's long overdue, and I can promise you my country, Sweden's full commitment to contribute to the full enjoyment of all human rights by all women and girls. So thank you for allowing me to give these introductory remarks. And now I want to introduce to you the panelists. So we have an amazing panel. Depti Gurung, Habiba Al-Hinai, Catherine Harrington, as you already heard, and Alison Petroziello. Depti Gurung is a campaigner for women's equal citizen rights in Nepal, where she leads a network of persons affected by gender discrimination in nationality laws who are fighting for gender equal citizenship rights. Habiba Al-Hinai is a women's rights activist and an advocate for stateless persons. She's also the executive director of the Omani Association for Human Rights. Catherine Harrington is the manager of the Global Campaign for Equal Nationality Rights, a coalition of national and international organizations and UN partner agencies working to end gender discrimination in nationality laws. And Alison Petroziello is an expert on gender, migration, and statelessness, and a PhD candidate in global governance at the Basile School of International Affairs, Wilfrid Laurier University, with more than a decade of applied research and international development work in Central America and the Caribbean. I'm now going to ask each panelist to speak for about 10 minutes, and thereafter I will open for questions from the audience. And I'm really hoping for an interactive session this afternoon. So I'm going to start with Depti Gurung, if I may, and ask you, please, Depti, would you share how gender discrimination in your country's nationality law has affected you and your family, and discuss your efforts to secure equal nationality rights for Nepali women?
Thank you very much, Your Excellency.
Please call me Annika.
Annika. Once again, namaste to everyone present here. I hope you wouldn't mind reading out, because that will save a lot of time. And my English is not very fluent, so that will save a lot of time. Thank you very much for allowing to read from my... Dear friends, I wish you a very good afternoon and a very warm namaste. I'm Dipti Gurung, and I'm from Nepal, the land of Mount Everest, Siddhartha Gautam Buddha, Gurkhas, and the land of stateless children, where mothers cannot confer citizenship to their children in her name simply because she is a woman. Let me start by telling you a story. A 35-year-old woman resident of Bhaktapur district who was working as a cook in Mount Valley English School had one son who had attained 18 years of age. Her husband had gone to Japan years before and did not return to Nepal. Despite her efforts, she was unable to provide a citizenship certificate to her son, as her husband's family members denied recognizing him because they feared they would claim property. At last, she committed suicide by hanging herself on 3rd August 2013. Well, this is just not a story, but everyday reality that we are facing. And there are far too many stories like this one. We are going to upload all the stories that I have jotted down here, and you'd be able to download and read it later on. I myself have been a single mother of 2 daughters. So when the role came to me to be a single mother for 2 beautiful daughters, I was more than willing to take up my responsibilities. Along the way, the shame, blows, bruises that I got from my own world was, I won't lie, was very, very hurtful. You know what was most hurtful? It was when my daughter, elder daughter, sat to fill up forms for a high school examination and was asked by her teacher, what kind of girl doesn't know who her father is? After her 12th grade, when it came to choose her university, she chose to study medicine, which was her childhood dream. But she was barred from sitting for the entrance exam because she did not have her citizenship certificate. It was horribly painful to see my sweetheart shut her books and shut herself in her room for 3 days. My younger daughter lost her enthusiasm for life at a very young age when she felt uneasy to go out with friends and stopped choosing from the best of opportunities and rather choose from minimal possibilities. I died 100 times. Time and again, when we went to request for the citizenship at the CDO office, we were questioned about the father of the family. I was mocked in a room filled with male officials and was told in front of my daughters that I was a modern-day Virgin Mother Mary who didn't know who fathered her daughters. Back home, an iron hook stared from the ceiling. The hook teased me time and again. I felt my neck while I looked up to the hook. I cannot say which feeling was stronger in me then, the rage that was building in me as tsunami of justice and unfairness, or the hook in the ceiling. My now husband, who is also my childhood friend, and with whom I had the most beautiful childhood days, was also denied his citizenship because he lost his father at a very young age. He wasn't able to acquire citizenship because his father had passed away before he had acquired citizenship for himself, and he was denied the right to his mother's citizenship. With 5 stateless people in my family, I had only questions to meet every morning with no possible answers to them. That is when I heard the news of mother from Bhaktapur who wasn't able to stop her temptation of the hook in the ceiling. Like her, I could have become a few lines in the newspaper. Instead, I started a Facebook page called Citizenship in the Name of Mother, and moved on to the next level. For another 6 years, our family fought a very tiring battle. Sometimes I could see a warm light at the end of the tunnel when I met people like Advocate Meera Dhungana, Sapna Pradhan Malla, etc. Amaldi Chikera, Catherine G, and Deirdre G, who helped us on this battle, were a hope of life to us as well. My campaign spread over time, from demanding equality for women in the Constitution to calling for the drafting of a bill, from street protests, hunger strike, 2,000 people rising to sleep on the street in the protest. Trust me, all this was met with very supportive souls. In every step, the rage in me would take a leap and turn it into a tsunami. While I was on the campaign to lobby for equality, parallel to it, I was also fighting at the court. Finally, in the year 2017, I was able to acquire citizenship for my 2 daughters. With 2 down, 3 more to go, I pushed even harder. I called out for the press meet, appealed for the international help, and just 2 months ago, my husband, my brother-in-law, and my sweet nephew, Noah, all were granted citizenship too. I had always dreamed that I would celebrate with full-heartedly after succeeding to acquire citizenship for my family members. But trust me, the other hopeful pairs of young eyes like Mallika, Anish, Arjun, and Christina, and so many other children are denied citizenship because our country denies women's equality. I cannot betray them. Now the hook on the ceiling disappeared, and I could finally see sky full of stars. But I will always carry the scar till I die. I know that the ceiling still exists for so many people, and I hope and pray from the bottom of my heart that the ceiling turns into open skies for them as well. Till then, my battle will not end at all. In fact, I feel the battle has just started. Do you think my family is safe now for now? Well, here's another story. In year 2014, Makwanpur district office decided in favor of Lucky Sharma, who was granted citizenship through his mother by descent. The very next day, he was called in the same office and was told to come with his citizenship. He did as was told. The same chief district officer who had granted citizenship a day earlier took it away. He was furious because the news had caught on local media and had drawn attention. Lucky, after requesting several times when citizenship was not handed back to him, had no option but to go to the court. His case was rejected by the appeal court, and he took his court to the Supreme Court. After again fighting for 4 more years, the court decided on his favor, and he was granted citizenship back in 2018. Because of the stress he endured Throughout the time, he was mentally affected so much so that he resorted to alcohol now. My point here is that even after acquiring citizenship, some stateless people, we are still at risk that it may be taken away by just a whim of an officer, a letter from a home minister, or a new policy that may just change any time. At this moment, I stand here as a voice of all the stateless children in Nepal, as a mother who cannot confer citizenship to her children, and of all the children and mothers of the world who are bearing the same pain. For that, I would like to urge especially to the inclusion that I feel strongly about them. I am not any scholar from a great university, but I am a mother of 2 daughters and a wife of a stateless man. Hence, from the ground experience, I would like to make these 2 recommendations. Often we are asked how it feels to be stateless. At such times, I felt we had been forgotten and forbidden to live freely. I felt like a fugitive in my own country for a crime which we have not committed. When all your future hopes drown in darkness, you don't dare to dream. In such situation, many educated youths are being trapped in the bubble of non-existence. National and international communities for sure are working to bring changes at the policy-making level, but with due respect, I found that no rescue and relief package effort has been made for the stateless people. Children from 14 to 18 and youth from 18 to 28 have at least completed their high school's studies or bachelor's level. They have almost chosen their field of faculty, but they reach a full stop because they lack a piece of paper, which is most unfair and cruel. Many face the risk of falling victim to crimes and modern-day slavery, to human flesh trade. Hence, I would like to request the change makers here today to hear their cries and bring out some kind of solution so that country of origin of these children can at least, if not more, immediately announce relief packages for stateless children and youth allowed to be able to pursue their education and work, etc. They can be productive citizens of those nations. New citizens who have recently acquired citizenship after immense difficulties still face constant threat of being ripped off their newfound status. Others have fought their entire life and haven't succeeded yet. Thus, I plead the international community to not look into this matter lightly. You might say, those who haven't gotten their citizenship can try again. Yes, they can. But they may or may not succeed again. But what about the numbers of years it can take before they can finally receive their citizenship? And wouldn't it be worse to have your citizenship snatched away from you again, even if you succeed? We know legal reform anywhere takes time, but these children are suffering unbelievably while they wait for politicians to act to grant them citizenship, which should be their right at birth. This is not only in Nepal, but is the fate of children of 25 countries. So I would like also call on your to pressure these 25 countries to uphold these innocent children's equal right to education, healthcare, social services, while they wait to be counted as citizens. So I am humbly request for those working to eradicate statelessness to fight for an end to the discrimination root cause and to frequently ongoing violation faced by stateless persons. And also I'd like to request, ISI, the Institute of Stateless and Inclusion, has published a beautiful book called The Girl Who Lost Her Country. By contributing to that book, you may help carry out our campaigns in near future as well. So dear friends, when I get back home and return back to the street to chant slogans for equality or sit for hunger strikes, I will remember all of your faces here in my heart and will trust that you all are putting in effort to free the stateless prisoners and rescue them from their misery. Thank you, and my warm namastes.
Thank you so much, Deputy Gurung, for that amazing story. And if you will remember us and our faces, we will definitely remember you and your story, because you are describing it so well, what it feels like to be stateless. You said, forgotten and forbidden to live truly. That's exactly what it's about. And women are suffering the most, as well as their children. So thank you very much for sharing that with us, and also for giving us a little bit of hope that change is indeed possible. And now we are going to turn to Habiba Al-Hinai. And Habiba, your family has also been directly impacted by gender discriminatory nationality laws. And you too have been a tireless advocate for reform in quite a challenging context. How did you come to be an advocate for women's equality and nationality rights? And have you seen any progress since you have become active on this issue?
Thank you, Excellency. Hello to everyone. So I am a human rights activist since 1990, but at the beginning I was advocating for the rights that the government are happy with, such as charity, women in sports. But in year 2000, I started campaigning for the rights of children with Omani mothers who are married to non-Omanis. Some of them were stateless. The unfair laws and legislations opened my eyes shortly after the birth of my son, who is a German citizen from a divorced Omani mother. When my son was born in 1998, I came to realize that I could not issue a residence permit, neither for my son nor for my husband then. Actually, I will give you an example. When my son was born premature, when I was at the hospital, I got married with a permit. I had a permission from my government. So I was in the hospital, my son was premature, and he had to be in an incubator for 10 days. Then suddenly I received this heavy, heavy bill that I had to pay. So I told them, but I'm Omani, why? It's free medical care here. They said, but you have a foreigner child. But I said, until I walked into the hospital, I wasn't paying anything. But I said, yeah, but now this creature is a foreigner. You have to pay the bill. So because my son's residence also was linked with his father's residence, and his father's residence was linked with his work permit. And if he loses his work, his job, he has to leave the country with his father. At the beginning, I started raising this issue in the local media. I was interviewed in local TV channels, radio stations, and newspapers and magazines. I was hoping that the Omani government will act fast to fix this complicated issue when they became aware about the level of gender discrimination and the violations against women's rights and their children. Especially, this practice violates Omani law, which affirms that all citizens are equal. In 2007, I interviewed hundreds of Omani mothers in a similar situation. I gathered evidence of more than 100 such cases and submitted them to the Ministry of Social Development, but no changes. These women were suffering from discrimination under the law. Their children do not have the right of residency permits in their mother's land, nor benefit from higher education, work in Oman, and cannot inherit their mother's property, receive their mother's nationality, and many of them were stateless. And worst of all, they must leave the country after when they're at age of 18. So it was obvious that these women were subjected to exploitation and extortion in order to obtain a residency from private company owners. Also, they had no choice but to issue a company permit under their names, and they can register their husbands and children as their employees. So some of them will be their mother's drivers or domestic worker, because it's cheaper to renew the permits in the Ministry of Commerce and Industry. These unfair circumstances added an extra huge burden on the shoulders of these families. So I'll be talking about Omani stateless persons in Oman and in the countries which have a large population of people of Omani origin. The history of Oman is closely linked with East African countries, especially Zanzibar, Burundi, Kenya, etc. I was born myself in a small, tiny island called Pemba in Zanzibar, where thousands of Omanis immigrated to settle in East Africa countries before the oil boom. In search for a better life, Omani sultans ruled Zanzibar and its neighboring countries for hundreds of years until the coup in 1964, which saw the end of the Omani rule in Zanzibar. However, as soon as the coup against the Omani rule in Zanzibar took place, there was a reverse migration back to Oman. As a result, thousands of Omanis returned to their motherland. At that time, soon after the new sultan took power in 1970, it was possible to return to Oman. The new sultan called upon the Omani people from all over the world to return to their motherland to contribute in the process of building their country and development. And this coincided with the beginning of the oil era. The country was then in urgent need for manpower and competences. A few years later, the Omani government closed the doors of the right to return of the Omanis once it reached the sufficiency of external expertise. And with time, turned its back from accepting the requests of thousands of Omanis who demanded the right to return, including thousands of women, mothers, and their children, who are stranded in East Africa and stateless till this date. Many women who managed to return to Oman some of them decided to marry to extend families in East Africa. So, and many of their children are stateless because they cannot issue residence permits for their husbands. So the husband is in Tanzania and the mother and the children is in Oman. And they don't want to issue Tanzanian nationality, so they stay in the country stateless for years until their 20s and 30s. Moreover, blogging is another outlet I used to draw attention to human rights violation. I started an online campaign to demand our rights. A week ago, and coinciding with this conference, the Oman Association for Human Rights launched the Right to Return campaign in order to deliver to the international community the voice of thousands of marginalized Omanis in East Africa who demand their right to return to their motherland. The Oman Association for Human Rights has also received dozens of complaints from trapped Omani origins in Burundi and Zanzibar, with hundreds of signatures for being victims of discrimination and statelessness. In April 2016, just before my son reached 18 years of age and had to leave his beloved country, Oman, where he was born and lived there all his life, I prepared a petition demanding the Omani government to change this unfair law. This petition was signed by hundreds of Omani women and many sympathized men, but still no changes were made. 2 weeks ago, exactly on the 2nd of June, the Omani Ministry of Interior issued the regulations for the new Omani nationality law. This new law was nicely polished, but still includes gender discrimination. Of course, my time here does not allow me to go to every single detail, but I will just quote Article 3, which says, "It shall be noted that the ministry reserves the right to reject any application without providing any reason whatsoever," because it includes that the mother has the right to apply for citizenship, and she has to pay like $670 per child. And plus, she has to submit a list of demands, like she's clear of criminalization. I mean, what it has to do with the children, if she's a criminal, for instance. So another Article 11, it says, "A person shall be deemed Omani national in the following cases. Number one, if he is born in Oman or abroad and his father quote, father at the time of birth was an Omani national. So I'm very much interested, because this law is just 2 weeks ago, to know in the next few years how many Omani children from non-Omani father granted nationality. That's how we can, decide if this law is fair or not. So finally, despite my peaceful and legitimate human rights work in Oman, I was arrested, threatened, persecuted, and forced to flee my beloved country, Oman, to Germany, where I live now with my son. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you so much for a very interesting story. And it's fascinating to hear about all the advocacy work that you have been doing. And I'm sure that you have played not just a small part in provoking this new changed legislation in Oman. And let's hope that it's going to be, as you said, you will see the changes in the next few years, that it will actually be a more open process and changing a bit the situation. So congratulations for your work. Thank you. We are now going to move to Catherine Harrington. And Catherine, we have heard now about the terrible impact of gender discrimination in nationality laws and learned about some of the national and regional reform efforts. When you look at the issue from a global perspective, how are we faring in terms of eliminating this form of gender-based discrimination? And what are some of the successful strategies being used to build momentum for reform? What can we do to change the situation?
Thank you. And if you'll allow me, I'm going to come up here because I'm going to show you a few pictures while I talk about some of the momentum for reform. First, I just want to say, as the campaign manager of the Global Campaign for Equal Nationality Rights, I am so grateful and honored to count these brave, fearless, strong activists, Habiba and Deepti, as members of our global coalition. So thank you for all of your work and sharing your activism and your experiences. So after hearing the real tragic impact of these laws, I am very pleased to tell you about the momentum that is happening globally, regionally, and at the national level to eliminate gender discrimination in nationality laws. And I wanted to start with this picture because I think it's very important to recognize the fact that in the countries where we have seen reforms take place already, and in the countries where there is strong momentum for reform right now, this is first and foremost being led by women's rights organizations on the ground that are working at the national level and that are calling for reform. And we have a picture here from a campaign in Lebanon where there is quite a strong campaign for reform. And you have here both women, men, children, affected children, and they've been out in the streets in Beirut and across the country for, unfortunately, decades calling for this reform. There has been some momentum recently, and we're hopeful that the government will continue to take forward a nationality law that grants women the equal right to pass their nationality. It's important to also note when thinking about this in terms of the broader gender equality movement that these campaigns for reform, like you're seeing right here in this picture, have had a broader impact on national conversations about women's equal status as citizenship itself and their equality within the family and within society. And another important point about these reform movements is that they're also influencing and are affected by other movements for reform in terms of gender equal laws, particularly family law reform. And in many instances where we've seen nationality laws be reformed to uphold gender equality, they've happened sequentially either first or after family law reforms in tandem. And another point that's important to recognize is the fact that as women are increasingly recognized in positions of political power, you're also seeing a correlation between that and reform, which comes as no surprise. More good news. In the past 15 years, as has been mentioned by Ambassador Markovic, there have been 19 countries that have reformed their nationality laws to eliminate gender discriminatory provisions. Not all of these countries that are listed here have eliminated every gender discriminatory provision. Some of them took the first step of eliminating gender discrimination with the conferral of nationality on children, but a number of them did comprehensively remove gender discrimination from the law. We saw in 2017 alone, if we can get the slide, thanks. In 2017 alone, we had 2 countries, Madagascar and Sierra Leone, reform their nationality law to uphold women's equal right to pass nationality to their children. And we have here a picture from, this was actually in 2015, the Global Campaign's first national convening, bringing together government representatives, civil society, and affected persons at Parliament in Madagascar in partnership with the UN Refugee Agency, UNICEF, OHCHR, and a very strong national partner, Focus Development, which is a women's rights organization in Madagascar. And we had parliamentarians, that paper that Noro, the executive director of Focus Development in Madagascar, is holding a statement of commitment by parliamentarians to reform the law, and they did so within the next year. We also have at the international level important progress for reform, and I think these are the foundation of this attention at the international level is linked to the fact that there are a number of core human rights treaties that mandate that state parties uphold gender equal nationality rights. You see this in the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, of course, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, the Convention on the Rights of the Child, which both calls on state parties to uphold child's ability to acquire a nationality and the parent's right to confer nationality, and also importantly underscores that the rights in the convention should be applied with non-discrimination not only on the basis of the sex of the child, but also on the basis of the sex of the parent. The Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, of course, has in Article 9 a clear call for state parties to uphold parents' equal right to pass nationality to their children, to acquire, change, and retain their nationality for all citizens, regardless of gender. And the CEDAW Committee has clarified in General Comment 32 that this also applies to an equal ability to confer nationality on spouses. So one of the entry points that we use and that we're seeing continued momentum at the international level is through the submission of documents, submissions to international human rights treaty bodies, to the CEDAW Committee, to the Committee on the Rights of the Child, for the Universal Periodic Review process, which is drawing attention to this issue. And those human rights bodies are consistently calling on countries with gender discrimination in their nationality laws to reform their laws. And what is particularly powerful, especially, is when member states are themselves drawing attention to this issue through the Universal Periodic Review process. We also have at various international arenas, like the Commission on the Status of Women, where this issue is being raised. We had in 2016 at the Human Rights Council, a new Human Rights Council resolution on women's equal right to pass nationality, and this is their equal right in law and practice. This was not only passed, but this resolution was actually co-sponsored by 107 member states. And during a side event there, we had the ambassador of Algeria and Madagascar talk about the importance of these reforms. At the Commission on the Status of Women last year, we had the executive director of UN Women, Under Secretary General, drawing attention to this issue, as well as Habiba herself, with cabinet ministers from Sierra Leone and Morocco talking about the importance of reform in those countries. We also had, at the high-level political forum, increasing attention to this issue and the important links between gender equal nationality rights and sustainable development. And this should come as no surprise. This was also an issue that has been raised at the World Bank and that is increasingly being looked at by economists, because the Sustainable Development Goals, we know that they're all interconnected, and it's very clear when you hear about the wide-ranging impacts of these discriminatory laws that they hold countries back. And you also see that 9 out of the 17 SDGs are particularly impacted by these laws. So countries have to understand, governments have to understand that by maintaining gender discriminatory nationality laws on the books, they are in fact holding their country's development back. I also wanted to highlight, before getting into the regional component, that we've also seen attention to this issue in the Global Compact on Migration, which is calling for elimination of gender discriminatory nationality laws as well. At the regional level, there's increasing normative frameworks that are calling on the member states of regional bodies to uphold gender equal nationality rights. We've seen this in ECOWAS with the Abidjan Declaration on the Eradication of Statelessness, which all 15 ECOWAS members have endorsed in terms of eliminating gender discrimination in their nationality laws in line with their CEDAW commitments. And these regional commitments are being replicated in other subregions in Africa and elsewhere. We also have in the region that has the highest concentration, so before I, get to what I was just about to say, I also wanted to note that we have right now a draft protocol to the African Charter on Human and People's Rights on the right to a nationality and the eradication of statelessness. This also has draft language calling on all member states and state parties to the African Charter to eliminate gender discrimination in their nationality laws. In the Middle East North Africa region, the region that has the highest concentration of countries that deny women the equal right to pass nationality to their children and to their spouses, we had a groundbreaking achievement last year with the establishment through an Arab League ministerial conference of the Arab Declaration on Belonging and Identity. And this started first with a convening in Cairo of government and civil society representatives that we had with the Arab League, UNHCR, UN Women, UNICEF, and this resulted in a truly historic, for the first time, this was the first time that you had the Arab League looking at this issue of women's nationality rights. And this Arab Declaration on Belonging and Identity calls on all members of the Arab League to not only eliminate gender discrimination with the conferral on children, but also with the conferral on spouses and the lifting of reservations to CEDAW, in particular CEDAW Article 9. I also want to highlight that, and this is something that we emphasized in Cairo and then later in Tunis, where the Arab Declaration was endorsed, that while the region does have the highest concentration of countries with these discriminatory laws, it is also the region that has had the greatest number of reforms in the past 15 years. So there are many good practices, reforms in Tunisia and Algeria and Morocco and Yemen, and these experiences have been shared by governments in those regions. Next slide, please. Thanks. Okay. So getting to the national level, which is incredibly important, and then we'll close on what we need for next steps. As I said at the start, this reform is reliant upon mobilization at the national level. And we're seeing reforms take place and increasing commitments by governments to enact these reforms. We're seeing here some pictures from a convening in Togo that again brought together affected persons, government, and civil society. And a year after this convening, where activists raised awareness of the costs and the harm of these discriminatory laws, we have a new draft nationality code in Togo that is awaiting reform. It is awaiting Parliament to pass this law, and we're quite hopeful that we will see this. So in closing, there are a number of other countries that have taken steps that are on the verge of enacting these reforms, and what is needed at this point in time. One, we need to recognize that nationality rights are just that, they're rights. They must be framed as a right and not privileges that women are asking for applications, the state to decide whether or not they are approved. We see that civil society, international organizations, other states in bilateral diplomacy, and the UPR, when they highlight the inconsistency of these laws with countries' international obligations and their own constitutions, that's a successful strategy. We know that media needs to be sensitized increasingly. We need to continue to ensure that the voices of affected persons are at the forefront of these reform campaigns, because that's what changes people's minds. We need politicians to understand that there is a political cost to not backing reforms. We need to engage political parties and publicize their stances on these issues. We need to ensure linkages with other sectors, such as children's rights, sustainable development focused organizations, and anti-poverty campaigns. We need to heighten awareness that gender discrimination in nationality law has been eradicated in other countries in the region where these laws persist. Like any reform, we need to get the public on our side. And so, in closing, In addition to ensuring that we have multiple actors from other sectors working on these issues, we need resources to women's rights organizations on the ground to be taking forward this advocacy. We need men as allies, and I regret that we do not have a man on this panel. We do have some very strong male activists as part of our campaign. We need men as allies. We need women in power to stand up for women's rights. We had the president of Nepal at a very high-level event at the UN in New York during the Commission on the Status of Women, recognizing women in power. She does not support Nepali women's equal right to pass their citizenship to their children. What is required at the end of the day is the political will. We know that government statements about human rights, about advancing gender equality, must be backed up by action. Unlike most of the challenges facing the world today, with an unknown solution or a cost-prohibitive solution, this solution is cheap, it's easy, we know what it is, and all it requires is the political will for governments to stand up and say that women deserve the rights as equal citizens in their nationality laws. So I will leave that there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Catherine. I think you deserved some extra time because those last words that you gave us were really important on what needs to be done. But I think that you forgot one important issue, and that's actually making the economic case for gender equality. And you were talking about linking the gender equality with the sustainable development. And when you can show the consequences for a country's economic growth, you know, that's when you get the attention of politicians. So I think that's something that is very often missed, to make the economic case for gender equality also in this area. But thank you very much, Catherine. And now, our last speaker of the panel, Alison Petroziello, because we have been largely focusing this discussion up until now on gender discrimination in nationality laws, and we know that without first achieving equality in law, we cannot achieve equality in practice. But achieving equality in law cannot be the end of the story. Gender impacts individual nationality rights and stateless persons beyond nationality laws. And you have studied extensively how gender intersects with statelessness and nationality rights. And I understand that you have been participating in a meeting here in the margins to talk about just this. So I'm really looking forward to hear what you have to share with us. Thank you. And we are running a bit late, so if we are going to have any time for questions, we need to stick to the time allotted. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon. It's wonderful to share a stage with such powerful advocates for women's rights and equal nationality laws. So this morning, I had the privilege of participating in a secret roundtable, which is not on your agenda. And why it was secret is because our thinking is still rather nascent on these issues. And so it was convened by the European Network on Statelessness with the leadership of Nina Murray, who's here with us. And we had lots of very important and interesting actors with us. So what we wanted to do in this session was to think about, as Catherine mentioned, beyond calls for an end to direct forms of gender discrimination in nationality laws, that there's a lack of attention paid to the power structures, like patriarchy, that create and shape experiences of stateless people, and very little understanding as well of what this means for women's substantive equality. And we know that CEDAW, I'll stand over here because I can't see you, that CEDAW calls for removal of obstacles to substantive equality, not just on paper or in law, right? And so our policy and practice responses as well are therefore at best sustaining inequalities and at worst exacerbating them if we're not identifying and addressing them to achieve substantive equality. So we're thinking about what it means to take an intersectional approach, intersectional feminist approach to statelessness. So if that's not a concept that's familiar to you, I have a lovely slide to illustrate. It's a concept developed by Black feminist scholars in the US. Kimberly Crenshaw is one of them. And it's based on their lived experiences of being a woman and being Black. of also thinking about and raising that not all women's lived experiences are the same, and that we are marked in the flesh in different ways, by race, by ethnicity, by class, sexual orientation, gender identity, we could go on, right? And so intersectionality describes the interaction of these multiple identities and the lived experiences on the basis of those identities, which can either be ones of privilege or ones of oppression or somewhere in between. And so we might think of it as this intersection, as we see up here, of those identities. And so again, so one person might be privileged on the basis of gender, but oppressed on the basis of race or ethnicity. Another person might be oppressed on the basis of gender, but quite well off and able to pay her way. And so that's basically the concept. So what does it mean to apply that concept of intersectionality to statelessness? Here's a little bit of how far we've gotten in our thinking. We're thinking about it in terms of causes and in terms of consequences. So Catherine already mentioned earlier some of the historical legacies of colonialism that led to patriarchy manifesting itself in nationality laws and in considering who, in fact, is head of the family, who, in fact, can pass on nationality. And so since colonial times, there have been these patriarchal assumptions, which we need to continue to remove from the books, not only as an element of women's rights, but also as a process of ongoing decolonization. And also, we want to recognize the historical legacy of citizenship itself. It's not a given for women. Women have had to fight long and hard just to affirm our personhood, our citizenship, and racialized individuals as well have had experiences of mediated access to citizenship. And then once there's a conferral of citizenship, the fight continues for full equality within that, right? So we might also think of causes in terms of structural gender discrimination that's embedded in migration schemes and refugee law. Who can move regularly? Whose persecution is actually recognized and has a channel to move in the world? And then when that person who maybe moves irregularly or whose asylum case is not, in fact, approved, when she has children, right? What happens to those children? There's a risk of statelessness, right? And so somebody in our session this morning said questions of belonging are fundamentally about patriarchy, which has been exported through colonialism, right? So that's a little bit of our historical thinking. And then in terms of consequences, we think that intersectionality is useful for thinking through the different lived experiences of statelessness. And so while all individuals obviously have obstacles to access to health and education, employment, etc., the actual experience of that and where women or men might be channeled is different based on their gender, race, etc. So some of the key issues, so within that framework, we started to identify several. These are probably not all of them. But what came up for us is that beyond gender discrimination and nationality laws, it also intersects with civil registration, with family laws, and criminalization of adultery in many places in the Middle East especially. And those are issues that they're aware of on the global campaign and are raising, and that we need to work in support of and in coalition with the global campaign to continue eliminating them. But also, we have some guidance from CEDAW General Recommendation 32 on indirect forms of gender discrimination, cultural practices, and poverty, which often, in practice, make it impossible for women to register their children on an equal basis with men. Sometimes it's harder to detect when that happens, but the outcome is the same, and it produces statelessness for children. A main theme in our discussions this morning was around control of women's reproductive rights. And so when we think about the nation state and ongoing constructions of the nation state, that requires people. And the nation has often called upon the right kind of women to reproduce nation. And so when there are inconvenient populations inside of a territory in the eyes of a state, and they're reproducing, there can be measures to block their access to citizenship. And we see this happening in many different places. So who are the right kind of reproducers of nation is a question that we can ask. And whose access to nationality is facilitated and whose is blocked, and how is that happening in spaces that should be guaranteeing the right to health, and specifically sexual and reproductive health. The next. We also discussed agency. We talk about statelessness, stateless women and men, often in terms of victimhood. And there are certainly many, many cases of victimhood. But as we can see with the powerful voices and experiences of the women on this stage, we know that they are not solely victims. One can be victimized, but they are leaders. They have shown us what it looks like to show leadership, independence, agency, and to look beyond hurt, look beyond the hook on the ceiling, and take that and help others to produce change in our societies, right? So something that those of us who experience privilege in terms of race or education or mobility, we think about creating spaces and ways to amplify voices of stateless women and to be in solidarity and to really listen. Also, we were thinking about avoiding the equation of stateless women. Yes, I already said that. But one way to do that is to take a human rights-based approach, right? It seems obvious, but we have to keep saying that. But also, we saw that men are also affected by multiple forms of discrimination. So when gender and race come together, when sexual orientation and gender identity are affecting them. There was a case, Morales Santana, went to the Supreme Court in the United States, where in fact naturalized men had to reside in the US for 10 years. I'm probably not getting this right. And women had to only reside for 1 before being able to confer their nationality on their children. There are more details. Ask David Baluarte. And 3 countries, as Catherine mentioned, deny men the right to confer nationality on children born to out of wedlock. Those are, we continue to name and shame, Barbados, Bahamas, and Malaysia. So, how do we do this? And we invite you to join us in our thinking and trying to apply this important contribution of feminist scholarship to our work on statelessness. So how do we do this? Here are some questions you might think of asking. How does the same issue, statelessness, affect different groups of people? And I don't like to just say people, I like to continue to say women and men. But within women and men, within those categories, women and men who are differently positioned based on those intersecting identities. And we might ask the other question. So if something is blatantly racist, and I work a lot on the Dominican Republic, a lot has been written on racial and ethnic discrimination against people of Haitian descent. And so we've started asking questions, well, where's the patriarchy in this? What are the gender dimensions of this? It's not only racial and ethnic discrimination. That's not to create a hierarchy between them, but to look at the ways in which they intersect, to block access to nationality for all children born to people who are marked in those ways. In terms of agency, we might continuously recognize stateless women and men's independence, agency, and leadership in order to move away from addressing them primarily through a lens of victimhood. And I'm happy to say that that women's rights advocates who are working on migration, myself included, we got this language into the Global Compact on Migration, in case you recognize it, in your definition of gender responsiveness. CEDAW, let's make more use of CEDAW in our international advocacy efforts, but also relevant conventions, which may be the Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, in addition to the Committee on the Rights of the Child. We can raise these multiple forms of discrimination as both cause and consequence of statelessness in our treaty body review processes through different document submission. And also, what does this look like in practice? In case you're not, an analyst and an intersectional thinker, it means building coalitions and recognizing these intersecting identities helps us identify other allies who are sometimes unlikely, unlikely bedfellows who might produce interesting children. So women's rights activists, domestic workers, trafficking organizations, okay, there might be some existing allies there. But I like to give the example of faith-based organizations in the Dominican Republic. Feminists and migrant rights and nationality rights advocates would come together with the Jesuits around certain issues and addressing statelessness, and then we would part ways when it comes to reproductive rights. But anyway, it was a contingent experience of coalition building. And finally, why do this, if I haven't convinced you already? Why think intersectionally? As Sarah Ahmed, who is an amazing feminist and queer theorist, says, well, intersectionality is a starting point, the point from which we must proceed if we are to offer an account of how power works. So, at the risk of sounding too theoretical about this, if construction of citizenship itself is linked to the maintenance of these normative power structures, like patriarchy, like institutionalized racism, then combating statelessness and building inclusive societies requires dismantling and rethinking those structures. Figuring out who is working on each form of discrimination can also contribute to the existing strategy that we've seen of the Institute on Statelessness and Inclusion of what's called frame bridging or frame extension in the social activism literature with other agendas. So when we talk about linking with the development agenda and SDGs, when we talk about making the business case for or with the World Bank, we're talking about that kind of frame bridging. And we can do that by thinking intersectionally, thinking strategically, not just in terms of concepts, but in terms of activism. So thank you very much, and we look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. I thought that was a very stimulating presentation, and it made us, I think all of us, think a little bit harder on the intersections between our different fights that we have ongoing. And you made it more complex and more difficult in one sense, but at the same time you also appeal to look for new alliances, and I think that that's where the key is. So look for how you can line up with sometimes the unthinkable alliances, and there you can actually find a way forward. So thank you very much. We have very little time left, but I still would like to give the opportunity for one or two questions. So if there is anyone who is really burning to ask a question or to give a comment, please. This is your chance, opportunity, possibility. Yes, please. And if you can introduce yourself first.
Yes. My name is Denisha. I work with UNHCR in the Bahamas. I have a question, as Bahamas, of course, is one of the countries listed. There have been efforts to reform the nationality provisions several times under the Constitution. And I don't know, I think one could observe that because in the society, women themselves perceive that they are not discriminated against, either because they don't understand that in the Constitution, or they look around and they see that actually women hold like really high positions in governments, including, at the highest level as the Governor General. I think, I would like, advice from the panel maybe on how they see the effort to continue the struggle for gender equality. Like, what advice do you give in the context where actually women themselves don't perceive that they are discriminated against, even though factually legally. But there isn't this perception. Because they are in certain positions where they don't see it as an issue.
Yeah, as someone who followed and tried to support as much as we could that referendum that we worked on together, it was quite frustrating. You would see comments. There was quite a robust debate in the Bahamas on media and comments from people, including women, saying exactly, I'm not discriminated against. Of course, there were a core group of women's rights activists that were fighting for this referendum and gender equal nationality rights. I think there's a couple different things. One is, of course, internalized discrimination, right? Because when the Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women came to the Bahamas after the failed referendum, she noted the links between the discrimination that existed in law and the pervasive discrimination in society and high levels of gender-based violence. So unfortunately, while many may have perceived that they were feeling equal, we know that there's high levels of gender-based violence across the country. And I think that it just underscores how much is needed in terms of public awareness raising of the status of the discrimination in the law. What was really troubling to me, and I guess I'm not really giving you much of an answer because I had so many questions myself. I mean, I felt that resources were needed to do grassroots normative outreach change. And I think that is what's required over the long haul when you have something that's going to a public referendum like that. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think a woman who will comment, who is against women's rights, harms our movement 100 times more than a man. So this is what happened, like if I say in our country, there are elite women from elite families who are benefiting a lot from the state. And they do feel privileged and happy. And they are the ones mostly who have these positions, whether they are government human rights organizations or in ministerial level or diplomatic. So seeing Her Excellency here defending women's rights to me is like, wow. She's representing a government and she's advocating for women's rights. This is you don't see back home. You'll find even a woman who either keeps silent because she cannot really speak out, or she will talk opposite. She'll say, look at me. I'm a minister or I'm a diplomat and I have all the rights. So they are really, and they use them as figures, they are minority of course, to hit back and to delay our achieving our goals. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have one more question or comment? Yes, please. And please introduce yourself first.
So I'm Emma Barth, I'm from Thomson Reuters Foundation. I just wondered, the usual estimates for the total global stateless population are between 10 and 15 million. Are there any estimates about how many, possibly millions of people are stateless as a direct result of these laws? And secondly, very quick question, Habiba talked about this new law in Oman, or amendment in Oman. Does that mean it's coming off the list of 25, or no? Can you just explain why not?
So the law does not permit, the law does not grant women the right to confer nationality on their children at all. It says if children are born to an Omani man, that child is a citizen. If an Omani woman has a child with a foreign man or a stateless man, that child, married to a foreigner, the child can apply for citizenship. The government can reject it for any reason. They can take as long as they want to not answer. There's absolutely no right. It is a privilege that you request, and there's no accountability mechanism associated with it. So the 25 countries include a number that have provisions that permit application for nationality, or if the child's born inside the country but not outside the country. The countries on that list of 25 have nationality laws that deny women the same rights as men to pass nationality to their children. And your first question about the numbers, so this I know is something that's frustrating, and of course media everywhere when this comes up in target countries, everybody wants a number, and I totally appreciate why. We know that even for the estimate of stateless persons, it is an estimate. Oftentimes, these families are living in the shadows. The nature itself of being undocumented and being discriminated against, it's very hard to get figures on that. We do know in some countries, like Nepal, where you have roughly a quarter of the population that doesn't have citizenship documents. It doesn't mean they're stateless. They just, traditionally, there hasn't been or I should say historically, there hasn't been a high percentage of citizens that actually have the document in their hand. That combined with the gender discrimination in the law, because then you're requiring proof of the identity of the father, and it doesn't matter if the mother is holding that citizenship document in her hand. So you have a huge number of Nepalis that are affected by this. In other countries, we know that it's a massive number, in Jordan, in Lebanon, but the actual concrete numbers aren't there. While numbers are incredibly useful for advocacy, at the same time, from a human rights perspective, we say if it's one woman that it doesn't have the right to pass the nationality to her child or to confer nationality on an equal basis, the law needs to be changed. If you're going to call women equal citizens in your constitution, if you're going to make commitments about gender equality, your nationality law needs to uphold their rights as equal citizens.
Just because I've got to write a story, is it fair to say millions? Would that be fair?
Millions that are affected? Because there's not all of the children. The one other caveat that I would make, and of course this is a statelessness conference, but there are a massive number of children and families that are affected where, like Habiba's son is not stateless, he has German nationality, but if you're born and raised in the country that has been your country of birth, and you identify as being a member of that country, and you are considered a foreigner, it is very, very close to being stateless, except for the fact that you can obviously travel, you can leave the country, but in terms of your rights in the country. So I think it's safe. We can talk more about this perhaps offline.
Habiba, do you want to comment also on the Omani law? Again.
Yeah, I have a table. Actually, I did. I gave it to Catherine. As I said, submitting an application doesn't mean that you're going to get. You have the right, yeah. And on top of that, they add fees, very high fees per child that you have to pay, and you have to submit so many papers, and you have to follow up. It's very stressful. Imagine if you have 3, 4. On top of that, they have to be resident in Oman for 10 years or something. They have to be resident. So if the mother is not living in Oman, she doesn't have the right to apply for this law. So there's lots of comments there, but as I said, let's see. I don't want to say like I'm negative and I'm just criticizing anything. But I'm interested. I know a few families who meet these criterias, and I'm going to follow up on them and see how long it's going to take them until their children are granted. Because sometimes they wait until they're 18 on purpose, and then, well, they're already adults. They cannot have the nationality. So there's lots of games there that they can play, the government, but when they come to international arena, oh, look how we respect women's rights, and they talk about it, but on the ground it's not what is implemented. Yeah, and giving another example about women, this is another issue. I did a study about FGM in Oman, and the member of parliament from Germany came to Oman, and she met 17 women who are nominated by royal decree in Oman, and she asked them, is there FGM in Oman? Because this woman called Habiba did that. And they said, oh, she's not reliable, whatever she did is not true. This is a women answering to. So you really, you don't know what to do, but we try our best, to deliver both stories. If I do what I do, I cannot go back to Oman because I will be punished for that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now we know that you have a number of individual cases that you are going to follow. So that's going to be very interesting. It's not going to drag on forever, I think. Just make it public. Yeah. Okay. So this is the end of this panel. It was a really interesting discussion. I have learned so much this afternoon. So thank you very much for inviting me to moderate, and give these wonderful ladies an applause.